just fascinated watching you list where you're coming from. Then I see some entries from Europe and from all over the U.S. So I hope we have an interesting morning. And if you put your questions into the chat box, I will try to answer them. I may answer them as we go along, and I'll try to save a few minutes at the end for additional questions. If you would like to reach out to me independently, if you have questions that I don't get to, please feel free to do that. So what we're going to talk about today is life after 60. And let's see, I don't know if I see the poll. We have, as in the results, we've got 23% of you are approaching 60. 65% of you are in your 60s. And 13%, like me, are well over 60. I was 60 once. It's my 50th reunion in a month. And so, and since I didn't skip any grades, you can do the math and figure out where I am. And that's probably true for many of you as well. So what we're going to talk about is how do you plan for the rest of your life, for your future, at least for the next few years, no matter really what age you are, but especially once you are at or approaching 60, especially since in the US we think about 60, 65 as the area of retirement age. Of course, that could mean almost anything these days, and that's one of the things we'll talk about. So I like to call this spicing, spice it up, as a technique that I'm going to use. And I'm going to put up my slides now. And let's see if somewhere here I seem to be frozen. Lindsay?
Yes, let's see. Okay. Let me try to.
The technology is always the most fun.
There we go. Okay, so you're moving now. All right, there we go.
There we go.
Loading. Yeah.
All right. So we're going to talk about this as life after 60, if I can get, there we go. We'll talk about just facing up to the fact of getting older, the kind of life that you would like to have, how the SPICE approach works, some factors that might hold you back, and getting started. So we're talking about the future, and who knows? Any fool we'd be fools to predict it completely, but when we're talking about what we're going to be doing for the rest of our lives, we have to keep some statistics and figures in mind. One is that the average life expectancy for women today is over 80 years old, 81.1. Those with higher incomes, who are better educated, have access to health care, can expect on average, these are all averages, of course, to live even longer. And for anybody who is 60 years old today, you have a greater than 50% chance of living well into your 90s. So longevity is allowing us to live longer and to live healthier lives as well. At the same time, we can plan all we want, but one thing that getting older does teach you is that there's so much we can't predict. And so at the same time, that shouldn't stop us from trying to plan, because after all, the better planning we do, the more prepared we are, the easier it is to face the unexpected things when they happen. And so, there is a reason for optimism. I saw an interesting poll yesterday, a study that came out by TD Ameritrade, a financial firm. It was a study of millennials. And I have to say it was pretty interesting because what it asked them about was their optimism about the future, their feelings about the future. And one of the interesting findings was that, now these were over 1,500 millennials, or people aged 21 to 37, and they found that most of them expect to retire at the age of 56 on average, and that 53% of them expect to be millionaires. So it said that 73% of the men who answered expect to be millionaires at some point. 38% of the women have that same expectation, and many of the people who answered already are millionaires, which I guess is kind of a nice way to start off your life. We've reached the point where, some are very well-to-do, some not so much, some are worried. So we need to keep all of these factors in the back of our minds, but we want to move forward here and, as I say, do as much planning for the future as we want to do and can do. Let's see. I'm not frozen again, but my slides, here we go. So here we have a question I'd like you to answer in the chat box. What worries you about getting older? Just type in a few things. I can tell you some of the general answers that we get, to this question, and it's not just me or people in the field; it's anybody who asks about these things. Obviously, financial security is an issue. Am I going to outlive my savings? Do I have enough to last me into the future? Health is always an issue because we don't know. Some of us do know. Some of us have reasons to be worried. Some don't, but know that it's a possibility. Professional irrelevance, mental disability, losing loved ones, health, arthritis, Alzheimer's, boredom. And that's the one I want to talk about a lot today, because a lot of people spend so much time focused on the financial aspects of things that what they don't plan for is, what are you going to do with all of the extra days that you're going to have? Losing my independence, the rise of socialism endangering my retirement savings, all kinds, not feeling productive or useful. So lots and lots of things to worry about. And all of those have, there are good reasons for all of these things. But I have another question for you too, if I can get the slides to work. I don't know why. Here, let's try it this way. Okay. What are you looking forward to? Because there's also plenty to be excited about. And things that you'll have time to do now. And here we go, traveling, having a chance to finally go see the places that you want to go to, learning new things, more racquetball, reinventing myself, the freedom to do what I want. Grandchildren, reading, volunteering, you can see all of these things, spending more time with family and friends. These are all things that you are reaching the point where you finally have some freedom, some choices, and you can do the things that are important to you, not just the things that other people expect from you, whether it's at work or because they depend on you. They may still depend on you going forward, and you may still be working, but the sense of perspective that you develop also gives you a chance to move into it at a slower pace, as a couple of people have pointed out, and at focusing and setting priorities that are more important to you at the time and into the future. So I like to think of it as a gift. And I think when we do think of it as a gift, when we see it in a positive light, and we try to make the most of it, it's energizing. It gives us a reason to move forward. I have a few books and other resources at the end of the slides that I'll just pass along to you. And in one of the books, somebody pointed out that in Japan, The Japanese regard their elders as national treasures, and they even have a word, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, shibui, for the beauty of age. And so we can choose how we look at getting older. And so I like the idea of looking at it as the beauty of getting older, the sense of perspective and contentment and generosity and authenticity that so many of us have searched for a long time in our careers. And finally, it's up to us. It's not so much what other people want to use to define us as it is what we want to define ourselves. So what approach? This is one approach that I'm going to present you with to move forward, to do this kind of planning. And it's basically a simple acronym that goes into status, picturing your future, looking at what interests you, building and using the connections that you have to get where you want to go, and then exploring the many possibilities. So let's get started with the current status. These are questions for you to think about. You don't have to answer them in, but you can feel free if you have something to add into the chat. Who are you with? Are you alone? Are you with someone? In addition to my 50th reunion, I've also got my 50th wedding anniversary coming up a few weeks after that. Some people have been married as long as I have and longer. Some of you may never have married. Some may be divorced. I mean, the status could be anything. And so one of the things you need to consider is where you are. Many of you have children, I see, some adult children. So many of you, what I'm seeing is that some have children who are still at home or grandchildren and as well. But then other questions are also important. How satisfied are you with your life? These things that you're doing, the relationships that you have, are these things that make you happy? Are they fulfilling? Are they what you want them to be? Or is there something you want to change, to add, to drop? What's really important to you? These may be, the values you've always lived by, or they may be values you've put off for a while. But now is the time to start revisiting them. The things, whether it's meaningful work, whether it's being productive and purposeful, useful, as some of you have written in. Here's someone who wants to ride horses, train dogs, and scuba dive. Moving to Florida. I mean, there are so many changes and so many things going on. Do you want a greater sense of balance, a better pace? What are these things? Being creative, being in the arts, so many possibilities. And so the obvious question we need to work with is, how prepared are you? What kind of planning have you done? For some of you who are approaching 60 or in your 60s, or who have never done any planning at all and you're older than that, how prepared are you psychologically? Well, and so doing this current status is important so that you understand who you are now and where you want to be, so that you have a better sense of what you need to do to answer this last question in a satisfactory way. So we're starting out with status, but then we have to start picturing the future. And this is the big picture thinking. Now, some of you have a very clear vision you've given it a lot of thought. There's something you definitely know you want to do, and that's great. That makes it so much easier. For many of you, this is a much harder question than this simple picture would show, because there are either so many things you want to do that you don't know where to start, or there are so many possibilities you're afraid of overextending yourself and making yourself even crazier in your schedule than you are today. Or you have been so focused on what you've been doing for so long, whether it's your career, whether it's your work in managing a household, whatever it is that you haven't really thought about other interests or develop the kinds of outside relationships or hobbies that you can turn to as you move ahead. So the thing about planning for your retirement, and I use that word advisedly, as I say, because it doesn't necessarily mean sitting on a rocking chair or on a golf course. But whatever you want to do in the future, when you think about it, you can treat it and do your planning the way you've done a business plan, for example, by setting goals, setting action items, and then figuring out strategies for moving toward that goal or toward those goals. Or you can keep this far more fluid and open-ended, because in a sense it is open-ended. There are so many possibilities in front of you. There's no reason, unless you have a reason, and some people do, that you want to limit yourself or you want to focus in one specific area or in a limited number of areas. And so the approach that I'm going to talk about really works for either of those scenarios, either a very specifically goal-focused approach or a more fluid, exploratory approach, trying things, seeing how they interest you, seeing how good you are at them and whether they are what you expect, they meet your expectations, or, if not, moving on to something else. So there are different ways, and you can pick the one that works best for you. And part of this process may actually be figuring that out. If you've been very goal-focused all your life, this may be a new muscle. This more fluid approach may be a new muscle to exercise or to try out. And if you're somebody who's been very scattered all your life and unable to focus very clearly, this might be a time for you to give that a try. The exercise for this is to actually sit down and try to paint a picture of what your future might look like, if it could be anything you wanted. And I'm putting this here now, but this is something you can put off for now and go back to at any point and frequently from time to time, because obviously as you go along, things may change and the interests that you have now may shift, and you may come up with something you think might be better. But for just right now, if you close your eyes and thought about this, what would be a really wonderful future you? Give it a moment. And then think about these questions. When you see that picture of yourself, where are you? What are you doing? Is someone with you? How many people? Who's around you? What's going on around you? You can look at what weather is like. How do you feel? Are there any textures that you can feel? Do you smell anything? Do you hear any sounds? What are you wearing? You can ask all the details that go into this picture to try to imagine what a really great future would look like. And it can be a moment in time. It can be what a day would look like. Can also be what a year would look like, because some of you, there may be a lot of big activities like several trips or finding a new job or starting a business, things that would take a long time and require something that takes more time. So as I say, use this as an exercise to come back to every once in a while, and to think about what would a great future look like. And with that, we're going to go on, but I'd also like you, this is an exercise, this planning exercise, as we move into interests and the kinds of possibilities there are for you, that requires pen and paper, or if you're more comfortable doing it on a computer, on some kind of a keyboard. If you'd like to use crayons or paints instead of pencils, pens, that's all right too. But the idea is to start recording and to start looking at the various interests you have, as well as new ones that you hadn't even thought about, things that you come up with as you move along this process of trying to plan for what's coming next. So, the way to begin is to look at already, what does interest you? What do you love to do? And like I say, write these things down, make lists. Some people like to use Post-its, little sticky notes, and a big space, a wall, a table, a piece of poster board that you can move things around on, because things will shift and move around. And as you put those interests down, many of them will start to make sense when you juxtapose them with others. And so you'll be looking for combinations and other ideas that are sparked just by the act of reminding yourself of the things that you love to do. That includes things that you love to do but you don't have time for anymore, or you haven't done it for a long time because you've been so busy, or you put it off until later. And what is later? We may be at later. Now is the time to bring those out, to bring them back. You were a great, you loved playing piano, but you gave that up years ago. Maybe now's the time to take lessons again. A number of you mentioned taking classes as something, to stay busy moving forward. Auditing classes. There are so many lifelong learning classes at campuses around the country. There are online classes. So, learning, if you love to learn and that's something that you've always wanted to do, is go back and take classes. That's easy. Many of them are free. So, what are those things? What are your hobbies, the things that we used to do? How many of those would you like to bring back? Or did you not try because you were afraid to, because you didn't think it was cool, it was right to do it at a certain time in your life? Now's the time. Put it down on your list. And what new things? I have a good friend who retired. He's a doctor, and he retired in his early 60s, and he had one of the easiest transitions into retirement. He became busy right away doing, but with a really great schedule. And I interviewed him, asked him some detailed questions about how he did it. And he pointed out to me that from the time he was quite young, he had a little notepad. Now, he's in his 60s or 70s now too. So this was before we did it all on keyboards. But he had a pad of paper, and he kept it in his pocket. And whenever he came across something that sounded interesting or that piqued his interest, he would write it down. When he met people at cocktail parties who were doing interesting things, or when he read articles that took him into another area that he hadn't really thought about before, he just recorded it. He called it his personal interest list. Now, when he was ready to retire, instead of sitting down and saying, well, I'm 62 years old, and now what is it that I want to do and what interests me? He had pages and pages of interest to look back on. His challenge was different. It was narrowing that list. It was reviewing it and saying, picking out 5 or 6 things to explore today, or the few things that were obviously something he wanted to do. And so to create that list, to start building that list, now you could pick the phone out of your pocket or pick it up off your desk and add it to your note of, another personal interest. That's a possibility. If it doesn't interest you today, it's something to look into because it sounds intriguing. So this is probably the easiest way for those of you who are looking for things to start focusing on. And even if not, because who knows, if there is something that interests you, you want to keep track of that, because a few years from now, you may be looking for new things. So that personal interest list is probably one of the best ideas I've heard. I want to pass that along to you. So where are you? What are the things that you would love to do. For many people, staying at work in some capacity is a primary consideration. What we know is that about 2/3 of baby boomers plan not to retire or to work at least past 65 and into their 70s. So, the whole notion of a retirement date is artificial. It started with the Social Security Act, and it was passed at a time when the average life expectancy was actually younger than the retirement age that was set for purposes of Social Security. We've reversed that today and then some, and a lot of people are still active. They love what they do. They want to be useful in the world. They want to keep contributing. And so if what you want to do is to keep working, that makes sense. Some people want different careers. They like working. They don't necessarily like the work they've been doing or that they're doing now, but they want to stay busy. So the choices, the options are enormous. They're basically what you can get or what you can create. And that includes working full-time, part-time, on a project basis, on a contract basis, working just once in a while, working as a consultant in the same field, learning a new field and starting an encore career, volunteering and continuing to work, not necessarily getting paid for it, getting paid, but not as much, starting with a new organization, starting your own business. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that in the years ahead, people over 50 will be starting more businesses than any other age group. It's not just the young who are entrepreneurial. Any one of you, if there's something that interests you, can start your own business, can make a new product, can come up with a new idea. We have constraints around that, and I'll talk about that as we get further along in the session. But working is in some fashion, however you define work, and some people do define work only in terms of earning money or getting compensated for it. Other people will look at anything that keeps them active and contributing and serving in some way as work. Somebody's noted here caring for grandchildren. A lot of people in their 50s and 60s and older are primary caregivers for grandchildren or are helping their children by caring for their grandchildren. And so, and that is a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy. So, there are different ways of looking at work, but that is one activity and really a set of activities that is probably one of the most common, increasingly for people our age, as it's becoming increasingly rare for people to go from full-time work to full-time retirement without any kind of active work. So that kind of transition has changed already, and it will continue to, especially as we lead longer and healthier lives with more opportunities. Now's the time. You're interested in being more politically active. You always have been interested in running for office, starting to be a flamenco dancer, living abroad, whatever. There are so many different things. Now, for many of you who have been very, very busy and running constantly for a very long time, what may most appeal is doing absolutely nothing but sleeping and catching up on all of the Netflix movies you haven't had a time to watch, or watching Game of Thrones from the beginning all the way through, binging that, whatever it is. For some of you, that's absolutely a great plan, at least at the beginning. When we talk about planning for the future. It doesn't have to be the day after you leave work. If you're retiring, it doesn't have to start on a specific day. Easing into it, taking some time is great. What's not great is not figuring out something you're going to do at some point, even if it's only one thing a day, to keep you busy. Because one of the things that is a problem as the older you get, is that many people become isolated, many people become bored because they are happy doing nothing, but at the same time, it takes a lot out of you to do nothing. It's not good for your health. It's not good for your emotional health, or your physical health. It's much more important for you to stay connected and to be active. So take some time off if you need it. Ease into it, just gradually build up and try things out. But, have something in mind, have something on the horizon to keep looking forward to, and, to get you excited when you wake up in the morning. Obviously, the sooner you start planning, even if you're not going to put a plan into effect right away, but the sooner you start, the more likely some of these things are, that may sound kind of crazy, but the more likely they are to happen, and the more likely they are, whatever you want to do, that you'll be able to actually put your plan into action. So you've got your Post-it notes all over the wall. You've got 100 things that sound interesting to you, and you've got 15 or so that you would really like to start doing at some point, maybe not all at once. So which ones are you going to choose? So some of the questions you can start to ask yourself are these. Looking at all of these things, what are the things that would be meaningful to you? Now, earlier, when I asked you about your current status, one of the questions, was what's important to you? And that includes what values are important to you. What are the values that really mean the most to you right now? And now that you are, or you're going to be in a position where you'll have more time and more opportunity to actually give them a try. What would help you fulfill those values? Because now we're in the process of ranking, prioritizing all the many possibilities that are out there for you. And so which ones are you going to choose first? You can go back to them, you can add to the list, of course, but if you feel that you have a purpose in your life and that you're put here for a reason, it may be spiritual, it may be secular, it doesn't matter. But whatever it is, if that's a feeling that you have, then, which of these interests and activities are things that would help you toward that goal. If one of your concerns is that you haven't figured out what your purpose is in life, use that as the exercise, as the activity, trying to search for it. And one way you can search is by trying things out, by exploring, which we'll talk about later, by talking to people, by researching, by finding out more about what's out there that's a possibility for you, and how do you react when you think about it? Is it something that gets you excited? Is it something that you don't, it's interesting, but I wouldn't necessarily want to spend my day doing that. Also, what brings you joy? What are the kinds of things that bring you pleasure and that you enjoy doing? If you love going to a museum, what about taking the time now? If you love art and or music, whatever the museum is or whatever the art form is, what about becoming a docent? What about putting yourself in a position either to take more classes or to teach? Or especially if you're an expert in an area, I mentioned these, like the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. We have in the Bay Area, the Fromm Institute. We have a lot of places that on college campuses that are not necessarily programs for college students, but they're designed for people later in their lives. What could you teach there if you have an area of expertise that other people could share in? Especially when those are things that make you happy and bring you joy. What gets you excited, arouses those passions, and you hear about it and you can't wait to sign up, or you wish you could sign up. You just haven't done it up until now. Also, so many of you have talents that you have developed, skills, abilities, others, some sort of strength that could really benefit other people, and that would allow you to use those talents and strengths and skills in a new way, or even in the old way, in a new environment, for a new population, in a new setting. If there are strengths that you would like to use, either to exercise them because you're good at it and you'd like to keep doing it. And, I should explain what some of those are. If you're somebody who is super well organized, you've always been very well organized. And, you find that it's frustrating at work. Other people aren't especially well organized. Is there something that you could work on in an organization, for example, a nonprofit, or something that you could teach as a class, or in terms of how to be more organized? Could you tutor students? A lot of students need help in becoming organized and more focused on their work. Can you use that in your skill in some way that would be meaningful for you, but also help others in some way that would be, keep your interest as well as your skill up? If you're somebody who is really great with people and have always been the person, your friends come to for advice, what about becoming a coach? Right now, the world is filled with people who are coaches, some certified. There are all kinds of programs out there. Some are worthwhile, some are not so much. But so many people are becoming coaches because they're able not so much to give advice, but but to help people find their way, because you're really good at listening and at helping people figure out how to get past the obstacles in their lives, or to get great at what they do, because through your encouragement. So whatever the strengths and skills you've developed through your work, through your life, just by who you are, if you want to continue to use those, or to get better at some of the things, or to bring them back because you haven't used those talents or skills for a while, then this is a chance to take a look at the things that you've put up on your board and start to see whether there's a way of connecting the interest to the skill. What things keep you engaged? If you were going to read about something or do something, if you're planning to do it every day, or once a week, or just on an occasional basis, what kinds of things really get you engaged intellectually, get your mind, or your body? I mean, it could be exercise. If exercise is important to you and you could do it, maybe now's the time to start working toward that marathon. There are all kinds of things, depending on who you are and what interests you, that might help you bring those interests together, or start sparking new ideas about what those interest activities could be. And I put up here lastly, what's fun? It doesn't have to make you joyful. It doesn't have to, fulfill a passion, but it's fun. And it's important to add some fun in your life. Make sure, whether that's going out dancing or watching, horror movies with a bag of popcorn and a couple of good friends. What is it that's just fun, and it doesn't have to be meaningful, and it can be senseless and crazy, and that's okay too. It's kind of nice. I encourage people when they're talking about, planning for the future, what you also want to be sure you do is build in some flexibility and some time for spontaneity and things that come up that may not fit the plan you've set for yourself, but would be a fun diversion. And so keep that on your list as well. Now, with all of these great things, we know that there are possible constraints. Some of them are known, some of them are totally unexpected. And one of them, of course, is money. If you want to travel the world, with private guides and first class flights, that's going to take a lot of money. And if you're a camper and you'd like to get in an RV or just get in your car with a tent and your backpack and go for it, the money isn't such a big deal. So depending on the kinds of things you think you would like to do, one of the things that will come up is, how am I going to finance this? So planning financially, having a good understanding of your financial status now, what your potential income is, your sources of income in the future, and general kind of basic financial planning. Obviously, the more money you have, the more financial planning you may want to put into, you want to do because of different tax fees, interests, and heirs and things like that. So it's basic wills and estate planning. But having a good understanding of what you're going to be able to afford is important here, so that when you make your plans, I like to start out brainstorming, not caring about feasibility or practical aspects of it, but at some point we have to get real, and so understanding the money, the financial situation is important. Health is always a factor. Getting enough sleep, good nutrition, exercise, all of the things Most of us know these things. It's not that that we're ignorant of them. It's that we don't have the discipline to take care of them. And so this is the time to start being a little more disciplined, getting somebody to work with you on it, because obviously there are a lot of things we can't predict, we can't control, but there are some things we can. And so now's the time to take a look at what you can predict and plan for and take care of for yourself and for the people around you, your spouse, your kids, the people you care about, and who you want to spend the next 10 or 20 or 30 years or more with. Responsibilities for others. Many of you may be putting grandchildren or even your own children still through college. As we have kids later in life, many people find themselves with responsibilities for other family members, parents, siblings. And so when you have responsibilities to others, that's something that has to be factored into your plans, not because any of these constraints will stop you, but because they have to be considered. For those of you who want to keep working, this is an issue, ageism. When there was another article I saw earlier this week by a woman in the tech industry, which is notorious for this problem, and she was writing about the problems she feels as a woman, a mother, and an older person in the tech industry. And this older person, who felt she was the victim of ageism, was 37 years old. So when we talk about modern elders today, Chip Conley is someone who's been promoting this concept of the modern elder as someone who's able to be a mentor and a teacher and a supporter to others at work. because of all the wisdom and skills and talents and strengths we've accumulated. And that's a group that's starting at 50. So once we're in our 60s and 70s and 80s, we're into new categories. But it doesn't get easier when you're starting to look for a job. So finding ways, if that's an issue, especially in the industry where you're trying to work or where you're working now, but you're worried you're going to be aged out, is to start, thinking about the kinds of work that you can do that will get you past that. A lot of it is independent work as consultants or as freelancers. Some of it is simply, if there's a way to make yourself indispensable, that's great. A friend of mine who is a client of mine who at 55, was getting tired and everything. One of the problems she was facing was that her clients were retiring, being replaced by young people who wanted to work with somebody closer in age to them. So, there are challenges that we just have to be ready for. Any others, if you have other challenges and constraints, feel free to list them in the chat box. But when I talk about these things, it's not to scare you or to depress you or to say, stop, don't even make your plans. It's really to think about this. How are you going to prepare to deal with them and get past them and push through, and deal with life, get on with your life and have the future you want, in spite of those challenges. And again, the sooner you start to plan for them, the better prepared you'll be when the time comes. Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm going to go on to the next letter in our SPICE approach, which is connections. I mentioned earlier how important it is not to become isolated the longer you continue in living into your future. And the importance of connections comes to play in a number of ways. One is, as you're building your plan, you're trying to figure out how you're going to move forward, where you're going to go next, and how you're going to get there. It's really important to think about who you know. You've built up, by the time you're in your 50s, you have built up a sizable connection. These are people you know from business, from your social life, from school, from your kids' schools, from the clubs and organizations you belong to, pretty much everywhere. Oh, I'm looking, I see something here in the, I guess it went to all panelists, about someone who just got hired full-time in high-tech at age 69, in part by developing those connections. So that's great, and that's a great example of why those connections are important. Because when you're thinking about all the interests, whether you're looking for a job, whether you're looking to start a new business because you're feeling entrepreneurial, whether you want to go into consulting, whatever it is, who do you know who's doing it? If the idea is retiring and doing a major life transition, who do you know who has already done that and you could reach out to and to talk to about it? Who is doing it right now? Who's in the middle of it? Who's doing the job that you want? And if you don't know anybody who's in it right now or who has already done it, who do you know who knows the industry, the field, the organization? And if they don't know about it, who do you know who might know someone else who does, because they're well connected? When you think about the people you know, there are some people who are just connectors. They know a lot of people, even if you don't. And most of the time, those people, when you reach out to them, especially when you're asking for, an introduction, are happy to do it. So now the issue for you is, how are you going to reach out to them? And what are you going to ask? Because the important thing is to know what it is you want to ask. Sometimes it will just be for information. Sometimes it's because you're looking for a job and you want to know if they know somebody who's hiring, or maybe they're in a position to hire. Sometimes it may be a referral. Whatever it is, when you approach someone and you want to ask them for something, know what that something is, and be prepared about, for how you're going to ask them, so that your questions are specific. And I know I do a lot of work around mentoring, and a lot of times, especially young people will call and will say, "I'm looking for a mentor. Will you be my mentor?" Well, to a lot of people who are asked that question, that sounds like a full-time, lifelong commitment to do something I don't really know what it is, right? You haven't told me what that is. So, but if you say to me, you're really good at this, or you've been doing this for a long time, and I'm looking for information about how someone like me could get into this, or something I would like to do, or I would like to take lessons. Do you know someone who teaches this? Or, whatever it is. Be as specific as you can. It forces you to do a little more thinking up front, which is a good discipline for you as well, because it'll clear your thinking and make you so much better prepared to the people you call. The other thing that's important is to develop a personal advisory team, because this is, especially when you're going through these transitions, these life transitions, there's no reason to do it alone. Get people who you can go to, a collection of people, different ages, different backgrounds. May include, certainly if you're married or you have a very close relationship with someone who's going to be affected, include them, talk to them. If you're doing financial planning, your financial advisor is somebody who could be part of this team. Someone who has already made the transition that you want. Someone you trust who's creative, who is knowledgeable. Some of the things you want to consider also, creative, someone who's going to be honest with you. Now, just because they're honest, some people are honest in a way that isn't helpful. Like, that's a stupid idea. I don't think somebody your age should be doing that. That's not helpful. What you want is someone to say, you recognize it's going to be harder at your age, but hey, if that's what you want to do, you want people who are going to be encouraging. On the other hand, if it's something foolhardy, you want them to be able to talk with you about that too. Let's see, someone has suggested a piece of advice about asking for an informational interview, and it is an excellent idea. But make sure you have those questions clear so that you can be specific and not scare them off. Now, the last thing to do is to just start, to jump in, to start exploring. And how do you do that? You start with an informational interview, or you ask for an internship, or ask someone if you can shadow them, or you go online and you start looking up organizations that work, that help animals. You really love animals. What are the things you could do? Put down a list of organizations. Maybe you want to volunteer at at the local zoo, or maybe you want to work in a wildlife preservation organization. The fact is, there are so many possibilities. The idea is to throw out a few of them and then make contact. Make contact either indirectly by learning more about them, or directly by looking for opportunities where you can jump in. Some things require a longer timeline, and you can't just jump in. You want to start a business, you better know how to start it, what it takes, all the different kinds of questions you need and the issues you need to know. It doesn't require a year of exploring, but it's going to be a lot harder to do that. Or if you want to join, be on a corporate board, that requires laying a ground, foundation over a long period of time. So keep in mind, some things you can jump in, some things are going to take a little bit longer. So lay that foundation starting right away. But jump in, create opportunities, as I said, if you need to, by starting something, throw yourself out there and saying, I used to teach ballet and I'm not dancing anymore, but I can certainly help your little girl or boy, or I can help you if you'd like to learn some basics or put you in touch. Or maybe I'll start working behind the scenes at the local ballet company as a volunteer. So there are so many places to look for. I thought I would give you just a few resources here to get you started. One is as I was putting this together, I realized what a fantastic resource Smith College is. For those, I think most of the people on this webinar are alums or related to alums. One of the best things you can do is to go to any kind of local event that's sponsored by Smith. The women you meet there have to be they're always so interesting. They're doing really interesting things. They're the ones who may know other people who are doing the things you're interested in. If you want to travel and you don't know how to start, if you're alone and you'd like to go with a group, you can take advantage of the college trips. Going to reunions every few years anyway, a way to reconnect with old friends. One of the sources of connections that I hear about from my clients and from the people I talk to about these issues is how many of them find support and assistance through friends from college and even from high school, but going back to old friendships that you've had for a long time. I've listed just a handful of books here that I thought some of you might enjoy. Winter's Graces and Women Rowing North both came out within the last year, and they talk about the beauty, both the challenges, but also the beauty of getting older as a woman. The second half of life is about moving through stages and facing up to and finding new meaning, new energy, and new pleasure in the second half of life. Encore Career Handbook is just one of the many, many books about starting a new career. I've also put up some organizations. Encore.org is an organization I think is great. It's for people who are 50 and older who want to give back to the community in some way, improve the world, and do it through work. And so it's a matter of finding ways that people can work in mostly volunteer capacities, but some of them are actually, paid internships as well. Workforce 50 for people who are anything job related for people who are 50 and older. The Peace Corps. A lot of people wanted to join. A lot of people did join out of college. Many people wanted to and never did. You don't have to be any age. They don't have an age limit. And there's a senior Peace Corps. For those of you who find that interesting, go for it. Meetup is a website. All of these things are easy to find online. Meetup arranges events in all communities all over the country for people who share a common interest. The Transition Network is for women going through career transitions, life transitions. It's a support group. They have workshops, all kinds of useful resources there. Next Avenue is just a publication that comes out and on a very regular basis with different articles about getting older and or being over 50. 50 is the cutoff that we're working with these days. Stanford Center on Longevity is more academic. There are all kinds of research studies, articles, informational pieces, lots and lots of material. AARP, of course, I think I went to a conference recently sponsored by Encore and AARP. I think ARP is going to be taking over the world. The demographics are there, and they are their logo these days is all about their motive. Their point is about disrupting aging, and that's what they're doing in so many different ways. So this is just, these are just a few websites that I thought might interest some of you and get you ready. So there's no need to wait. You're there, and so this, I hope, spending the last hour together has been helpful to you, and you are ready to move into the future. So with that, my slides are done. Our hour is up. If there are any questions, do we have any time, Lindsay, if people have some questions? I guess not. So the slides, I think Lindsay's going to have to answer that. They will be available. Okay. Well, I thank you very much. And as I said, if you have individual questions, feel free to drop me a note. And hopefully we'll have a lot of people happily moving into whatever is next for you.